The Magic Pages, Favorite Fairy Tales is a wonderful book, compiled and illustrated by the talented artist Peter Newell. It brings together some of the best-known and best-loved fairy tales that have been celebrated for generations. From the majestic Jack battling the giants to the romantic Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and the enigmatic Little Red Riding Hood, each story appeals with its uniqueness and magic. The book also includes stories of the unattractive but kind Ugly Duckling, the beautiful and terrifying Beauty and the Beast, Princess Snow White and the unusual Red Rose. The fabulous Wild Swans and Ali Baba and his battle with 40 robbers are not forgotten either. But in addition to the well-known stories, the book also includes 4 others, not as widely known but no less interesting. All these exciting stories, brought to life in the dreams and imagination of children and adults alike, are based on the memories of various famous people who remembered them as their most favorite from childhood. Each page of the book is filled with magic, colorful illustrations, and unforgettable adventures that allow readers to plunge into a world of fairy tales and fascinating stories, opening boundless expanses of imagination and inspiring faith in magic and goodness. Magic Pages, Favorite Tales, is a true treasure trove of fairy tale magic that will never
Chapter
cease to
9 of
fascinate
Favorite
its readers.
Fairy Tales. End of Little Snowdrop.
Chapter 10 of Favourite Fairy Tales. Favourite Fairy Tales. The Story of the Three Bears. Once upon a time there were 3 bears who lived together in a house of their own in a wood. One of them was a little, small, wee bear, and one was a middle-sized bear, and the other was a great, huge bear. They had each a pot for their porridge, a little pot for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized pot for the middle bear, and a great pot for the great, huge bear. And they had each a chair to sit in, a little chair for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized chair for the middle bear, and a great chair for the great, huge bear. And they had each a bed to sleep in, a little bed for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized bed for the middle bear, and a great bed for the great, huge bear. One day, after they had made the porridge for their breakfast and poured it into their porridge pots, they walked out into the wood while the porridge was cooling, that they might not burn their mouths by beginning too soon to eat it. And while they were walking, a little old woman came to the house. She could not have been a good, honest old woman, for first she looked in at the window, and then she peeped in at the keyhole, and seeing nobody in the house, she lifted the latch. The door was not fastened, because the bears were good bears who did nobody any harm, and never suspected that anybody would harm them. So the little old woman opened the door and went in, and well pleased she was when she saw the porridge on the table. If she had been a good little old woman, she would have waited till the bears came home, and then perhaps they would have asked her to breakfast, for they were good bears. A little rough or so, as the manner of bears is, but for all that very good-natured and hospitable. But she was an impudent, bad old woman, and set about helping herself. So first she tasted the porridge of the great, huge bear, and that was too hot for her, and she said a bad word about that. And then she tasted the porridge of the middle bear, and that was too cold for her, and she said a bad word about that too. And then she went to the porridge of the little, small, wee bear, and tasted that, and that was neither too hot nor too cold, but just right, and she liked it so well that she ate it all up. But the naughty old woman said a bad word about the little porridge pot, because it did not hold enough for her. Then the little old woman sat down in the chair of the great huge bear, and that was too hard for her. And then she sat down in the chair of the middle bear, and that was too soft for her. And then she sat down in the chair of the little, small, wee bear, and that was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right. So she seated herself in it, and there she sat, till the bottom of the chair came out, and down came she, plump upon the ground, and the naughty old woman said a wicked word about that too. Then the little old woman went upstairs into the bedchamber in which the 3 bears slept, and first she lay down upon the bed of the great huge bear, but that was too high at the head for her, and next she lay down upon the bed of the middle bear, and that was too high at the foot for her, and then she lay down upon the bed of the little, small, wee bear, and that was neither too high at the head nor at the foot, but just right. So she covered herself up comfortably and lay there till she fell fast asleep. By this time the 3 bears thought their porridge would be cool enough, so they came home to breakfast. Now the little old woman had left the spoon of the great huge bear standing in his porridge.
"Somebody has been at my
porridge," said the great huge bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And when the middle bear looked at his, he saw that the spoon was standing in it too. They were wooden spoons. If they had been silver ones, the naughty old woman would have put them in her pocket. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the middle bear in his middle voice. Then the little small wee bear looked at his, and there was the spoon in the porridge pot, but the porridge was all gone. "Somebody has been at my porridge and has eaten it all up," said the little small wee bear in his little small wee voice. Upon this, the three bears, seeing that someone had entered their house and eaten up the little small wee bear's breakfast, began to look about them. Now the little old woman had not put the hard cushions straight when she rose from the chair of the great huge bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the great huge bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had squatted down the soft cushion of the middle bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the middle bear in his middle voice. And you know what the little old woman had done to the third chair. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair and has sat the bottom of it out," said the little small wee bear in his little small wee voice. Then the three bears thought it necessary that they should make further search, so they went upstairs into their bedchamber. Now the little old woman had pulled the pillow of the great huge bear out of its place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the great huge bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had pulled the bolster of the middle bear out of its place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the middle bear in his middle voice. And when the little small wee bear came to look at his bed, there was the bolster in its place, and the pillow in its place upon the bolster, and upon the pillow was the little old woman's ugly, dirty head, which was not in its place, for she had no business there. "Somebody has been lying in my bed, and here she is," said the little small wee bear in his little small wee voice. The little old woman had heard in her sleep the great rough, gruff voice of the great huge bear, but she was so fast asleep that it was no more to her than the roaring of wind or the rumbling of thunder. And she had heard the middle voice of the middle bear, but it was only as if she had heard someone speaking in a dream. But when she heard the little small wee voice of the little small wee bear, it was so sharp and so shrill that it awakened her at once. Up she started, and when she saw the three bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled herself out at the other and ran to the window. Now the window was open, because the bears, like good tidy bears as they were, always opened their bedchamber window when they got up in the morning. Out the little old woman jumped, and whether she broke her neck in the fall, or ran into the wood and was lost there, or found her way out of the wood and was taken up by the constable and sent to the house of correction for a vagrant as she was, I cannot tell. But the three bears never saw anything more of her. End of the story of the three bears.
Chapter 11 of Favorite Fairy Tales. Favorite Fairy Tales. Snow White and Rose Red. A poor widow lived alone in a little cottage, in front of which was a garden, where stood two little rose trees. One bore white roses, the other red. The widow had two children who resembled the two rose trees. One was called Snow White, and the other Rose Red. They were two of the best children that ever lived, but Snow White was quieter and more gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red liked best to jump about in the meadows, to look for flowers and catch butterflies. But Snow White sat at home with her mother, helped her in the house, or read to her when there was nothing else to do. The two children loved one another so much that they always walked hand in hand, and when Snow White said, "We will not forsake one another," Rose Red answered, "Never, as long as we live." And the mother added, "Yes, my children, whatever one has, let her divide with the other." They often ran about in solitary places, and gathered red berries, and the wild creatures of the wood never hurt them, but came confidingly up to them. The little hare ate cabbage leaves out of their hands, the doe grazed at their side, the stag sprang merrily beside them, and the birds remained sitting on the boughs and never ceased their songs. They met with no accident if they loitered in the wood and night came on. They lay down together on the moss and slept till morning, and the mother knew this and was in no anxiety about them. Once, when they had spent the night in the wood, and the red morning awoke them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white dress, sitting by the place where they had slept, who, arising and looking at them kindly, said nothing but went into the wood. And when they looked round, they found out that they had been sleeping close to a precipice, and would certainly have fallen down it if they had gone a few steps farther in the dark. Their mother told them it must have been the angel that takes care of good children, who had sat by them all night long. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's cottage so clean that it was a pleasure to look into it. In the summer, Rose Red managed the house, and every morning she gathered a nosegay which was a rose off each tree, and set it by her mother's bed before she awoke. In winter, Snow White lighted the fire, and hung the kettle on the hook, and though it was only copper, it shone like gold, it was rubbed so clean. In the evening, when the snow fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." And then they seated themselves on the hearth, and the mother took her spectacles and read aloud out of a great book, and the two girls listened and sat and span. Near them lay a lamb on the floor, and behind them, on a perch, sat a white dove, with its head under its wing. One evening, as they were thus happy together, someone knocked to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. Perhaps it is a traveler who seeks shelter." Rose Red went and pushed the bolt back, and thought it was a poor man. But a bear stretched his thick black head into the door. Rose Red screamed and sprang back. The little lamb bleated, the little dove fluttered about, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. However, the bear began to speak, and said, "Do not be frightened, I will do you no harm. I am half frozen, and only want to warm myself a little." "You poor bear," said the mother, "lay yourself down before the fire, only take care your fur does not burn." Then she called out, "Snow White and Rose Red, come out! The bear will not hurt you, he means honestly by us." Then they both came out, and by degrees the lamb and the dove also approached and ceased to be afraid. The bear said, "Children, knock the snow a little out of my fur," and they fetched a broom and swept the bear's skin clean. And he stretched himself before the fire and growled softly, like a bear that was quite happy and comfortable. In a short time they all became quite friendly together, and the children played tricks with the awkward guest. They pulled his hair, set their feet on his back, and rolled him here and there, or took a hazel rod and beat him, and when he growled they laughed. The bear was very much pleased with this frolic, only when they became too mischievous, he called out, "Children, leave me alone. Little Snow White and Rose Red, you will strike your lover dead." When bedtime came and the others went to sleep, the mother said to the bear, "You can lie there on the hearth, and then you will be sheltered from the cold and the bad weather." At daybreak the two children let him out, and he trotted over the snow into the wood. Henceforward the bear came every evening at the same hour, laid himself on the hearth, and allowed the children to play with him as much as they liked. And they became so used to him that the door was never bolted until their black companion had arrived. When spring came, and everything was green out of doors, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and may not come again the whole summer." "Where are you going, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go into the wood, and guard my treasures from the bad dwarfs. In winter, when the ground is frozen hard, they have to stay underneath, and cannot work their way through. But now that the sun has thawed and warmed the earth, they break through, come up, seek and steal. What is once in their hands and lies in their caverns does not come so easily into daylight again." Snow White was quite sorrowful at parting, and as she unbolted the door for him and the bear ran out, the hook of the door caught him, and a piece of his skin tore off. It seemed to Snow White as if she had seen gold shining through, but she was not sure. But the bear ran quickly away, and soon disappeared behind the trees. After some time, their mother sent the children into the wood to collect faggots. They found there a large tree, which had been cut down and lay on the ground, and by the trunk something was jumping up and down, but they could not tell what it was. As they came nearer, they saw that it was a dwarf with an old withered face, and a snow-white beard a yard long. The end of the beard was stuck fast in a cleft in the tree, and the little fellow jumped about like a dog on a rope, and did not know how to help himself. He stared at the girls with his fiery red eyes, and screamed out, "Why do you stand there? Can't you come and render me some assistance?" "What is the matter with you, little man?" asked Rose Red. "Stupid little goose," answered the dwarf. "I wanted to chop the tree so as to have some small pieces of wood for the kitchen. We only want little bits. With thick logs, the small quantity of food that we cook for ourselves, we are not like you, great greedy people, burns directly. I had driven the wedge well in, and it was all going on right, but the detestable wood was too smooth and sprang out unexpectedly, and the tree closed up so quickly that I could not pull my beautiful white beard out. Now it is sticking there, and I can't get away. There, you foolish soft milk faces, you are laughing and crying out, 'How ugly you are! How ugly you are!'" The children took a great deal of trouble, but they could not pull the beard out. It stuck too fast. "I will run and fetch somebody," said Rose Red. "You great ninny," snarled the dwarf, "to want to call more people. You are too many for me now. Can't you think of anything better?" "Only don't be impatient," said Snow White. "I have thought of something." And she took her little scissors out of her pocket and cut the end of the beard off. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he seized a sack filled with gold that was sticking between the roots of the tree. Pulling it out, he growled to himself, "You rude people, to cut off a piece of my beautiful beard! May evil reward you!" Then he threw his sack over his shoulders and walked away without once looking at the children. Some time afterwards, Snow White and Rose Red wished to catch some fish for dinner. As they came near to the stream, they saw that something like a grasshopper was jumping towards the water, as if it were going to spring in. They ran on and recognized the dwarf. "Where are you going?" asked Rose Red. "You don't want to go into the water?" "I am not such a fool as that," cried the dwarf. "Don't you see the detestable fish wants to pull me in?" The little fellow had been sitting there fishing, and unluckily the wind had entangled his beard with the line. When directly afterwards a great fish bit at his hook, the weak creature could not pull him out, so the fish was pulling the dwarf into the water. It is true he caught hold of all the reeds and rushes, but that did not help him much. He had to follow all the movements of the fish, and was in imminent danger of being drowned. The girls, coming at the right time, held him fast and tried to get the beard loose from the line, but in vain. Beard and line were entangled fast together. There was nothing to do but to pull out the scissors and to cut off the beard, in doing which a little piece of it was lost. When the dwarf saw that, he cried out, "Is that manners, you goose, to disfigure one's face so? Is it not enough that you once cut my beard shorter? But now you have cut the best part of it off. I dare not be seen by my people. I wish you had had to run and lost the soles of your shoes." Then he fetched a sack of pearls that lay among the rushes, and without saying a word more, he dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. Soon after, the mother sent the two girls to the town to buy cotton, needles, cord, and tape. The road led them by a heath, scattered over which lay great masses of rock. There they saw a large bird hovering in the air. It flew round and round just above them, always sinking lower and lower, and at last it settled down by a rock not far distant. Directly after they heard a piercing, wailing cry. They ran up and saw with horror that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the dwarf, and was going to carry him off. The compassionate children instantly seized hold of the little man, held him fast, and struggled so long that the eagle let his prey go. When the dwarf had recovered from his first fright, he called out in his shrill voice, "Could not you deal rather more gently with me? You have torn my thin coat all in tatters, awkward, clumsy creatures that you are." Then he took a sack of precious stones, and slipped behind the rock again into his den. The girls, who were used to his ingratitude, went on their way, and completed their business in the town. As they were coming home again over the heath, they surprised the dwarf, who had emptied his sack of precious stones on a little clean place, and had not thought that anyone would come by there so late. The evening sun shone on the glittering stones, which looked so beautiful in all their colors that the children could not help standing still to gaze. "Why do you stand there gaping?" cried the dwarf, his ash-colored face turning vermilion with anger. With these cross words he was going away, when he heard a loud roaring, and a black bear trotted out of the woods towards them. The dwarf sprang up terrified, but he could not get to his lurking hole again. The bear was already close upon him. Then he called out in anguish, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me, and you shall have all my treasures. Look at the beautiful precious stones that lie there. Give me my life, for what do you want with a poor thin little fellow like me? You would scarcely feel me between your teeth. Rather seize those two wicked girls. They will be tender morsels for you, as fat as young quails. Pray, eat them at once." The bear, without troubling himself to answer, gave the malicious creature one single stroke with his paw, and he did not move again. The girls had run away, but the bear called after them, "Snow White and Rose Red, do not be frightened. Wait, I will go with you." Recognizing the voice of their old friend, they stood still, and when the bear came up to them, his skin suddenly fell off. And behold, he was not a bear, but a handsome young man dressed all in gold. "I am a king's son," said he. "I was changed by the wicked dwarf, who had stolen all my treasures, into a wild bear, and obliged to run about in the wood until I should be freed by his death. Now he has received his well-deserved punishment." So they all went home together to the widow's cottage, and Snow White was married to the prince, and Rose Red to his brother. They divided between them the great treasures which the dwarf had amassed. The old mother lived many quiet and happy years with her children, but when she left her cottage for the palace, she took the two rose trees with her, and they stood before her window and bore every year the most beautiful roses, one white and the other red. End of Snow White and Rose Red.
Chapter 12 of Favorite Fairy Tales. Favorite Fairy Tales compiled and illustrated by Peter Newell. The Wild Swans. far away, where the swallows take refuge in winter, lived a king who had 11 sons and 1 daughter, Elise. The 11 brothers, they were all princes, used to go to school with stars on their breasts and swords at their sides. They wrote upon golden slates with diamond pencils, and could read just as well without a book as with one, so there was no mistake about their being real princes. Their sister Elise sat upon a little footstool of looking-glass, and she had a picture book which had cost the half of a kingdom. Oh, these children were very happy, but it was not to last thus forever. Their father, who was the king over all the land, married a wicked queen who was not at all kind to the poor children. They found that out on the first day. All was festive at the castle, but when the children wanted to play at having company, instead of having as many cakes and baked apples as ever they wanted, she would only let them have some sand in a teacup, and said they must make believe. In the following week she sent little Elise into the country to board with some peasants, and it did not take her long to make the king believe so many bad things about the boys that he cared no more about them. "Fly into the world and look after yourself," said the wicked queen. "You shall fly about like birds without voices." But she could not make things as bad for them as she would have liked. They turned into 11 beautiful wild swans. They flew out of the palace window with a weird scream right across the park and the woods. It was very early in the morning when they came to the place where their sister Elise was sleeping in the peasant's house. They hovered over the roof of the house, turning and twisting their long necks and flapping their wings, but no one either heard or saw them. They had to fly away again, and they soared up towards the clouds, far out into the wide world, and they settled in a big dark wood which stretched right down to the shore. Poor little Elise stood in the peasant's room, playing with a green leaf, for she had no other toys. She made a little hole in it, which she looked through at the sun, and it seemed to her as if she saw her brother's bright eyes. Every time the warm sunbeams shone upon her cheek, it reminded her of their kisses. One day passed, just like another. When the wind whistled through the rose hedges outside the house, it whispered to the roses, "Who can be prettier than you are?" But the roses shook their heads and answered, "Elise." And when the old woman sat in the doorway reading her psalms, the wind turned over the leaves and said to the book, "Who can be more pious than you?" "Elise," answered the book. Both the roses and the book of psalms only spoke the truth. She was to go home when she was 15, but when the queen saw how pretty she was, she got very angry, and her heart was filled with hatred. She would willingly have turned her into a wild swan too, like her brothers, but she did not dare to do it at once, for the king wanted to see his daughter. The queen always went to the bath in the early morning. It was built of marble, and adorned with soft cushions and beautiful carpets. She took 3 toads, kissed them, and said to the first, "Sit upon Elise's head when she comes to the bath, so that she may become sluggish like yourself. Sit upon her forehead," she said to the second, "that she may become ugly like you, and then her father won't know her. Rest upon her heart," she whispered to the third, "let an evil spirit come over her, which may be a burden to her." Then she put the toads into the clean water, and a green tinge immediately came over it. She called Elise, undressed her, and made her go into the bath. When she ducked under the water, one of the toads got among her hair, the other got onto her forehead, and the third onto her bosom. But when she stood up, 3 scarlet poppies floated on the water. Had not the creatures been poisonous and kissed by the sorceress, they would have been changed into crimson roses, but yet they became flowers from merely having rested a moment on her head and her heart. She was far too good and innocent for the sorcery to have any power over her. When the wicked queen saw this, she rubbed her over with walnut juice, and smeared her face with some evil-smelling salve. She also matted up her beautiful hair. It would have been impossible to recognize pretty Elise. When her father saw her, he was quite horrified and said that she could not be his daughter. Nobody would have anything to say to her, except the yard dog and the swallows, and they were only poor dumb animals. Poor Elise wept, and thought of her 11 brothers who were all lost. She crept sadly out of the palace and wandered about all day, over meadows and marshes, and into a big forest. She did not know in the least where she wanted to go, but she felt very sad, and longed for her brothers, who, no doubt like herself, had been driven out of the palace. She made up her mind to go and look for them, but she had only been in the wood for a short time when night fell. She had quite lost her way, so she lay down upon the soft moss, said her evening prayer, and rested her head on the little hillock. It was very still, and the air was mild. Hundreds of glowworms shone around her on the grass and in the marsh like green fire. When she gently moved one of the branches over her head, the little shining insects fell over her like a shower of stars. She dreamed about her brothers all night long. Again there were children playing together. They wrote upon the golden slates with their diamond pencils, and she looked at the picture book which had cost half a kingdom. But they no longer wrote strokes and noughts upon their slates as they used to do. No, they wrote down all their boldest exploits, and everything that they had seen and experienced. Everything in the picture book was alive. The birds sang, and the people walked out of the book, and spoke to Elise and her brothers. When she turned over a page, they skipped back into their places again, so that there should be no confusion among the pictures. When she woke, the sun was already high. It is true she could not see it very well through the thick branches of the lofty forest trees, but the sunbeams cast a golden shimmer around beyond the forest. There was a fresh, delicious scent of grass and herbs in the air, and the birds were almost ready to perch upon her shoulders. She could hear the splashing of water, for there were many springs around, which all flowed into a pond with a lovely sandy bottom. It was surrounded with thick bushes, but there was one place which the stags had trampled down, and Elise passed through the opening to the waterside. It was so transparent that had not the branches been moved by the breeze, she must have thought that they were painted on the bottom, so plainly was every leaf reflected, both those on which the sun played, and those which were in shade. When she saw her own face, she was quite frightened. It was so brown and ugly. But when she wet her little hand and rubbed her eyes and forehead, her white skin shone through again. Then she took off all her clothes and went into the fresh water. A more beautiful royal child than she could not be found in all the world. When she had put on her clothes again and plaited her long hair, she went to a sparkling spring, and drank some of the water out of the hollow of her hand. Then she wandered farther into the wood, though where she was going she had not the least idea. She thought of her brothers, and she thought of a merciful God who would not forsake her. He let the wild crab apples grow to feed the hungry. He showed her a tree, the branches of which were bending beneath their weight of fruit. Here she made her midday meal, and, having put props under the branches, she walked on into the thickest part of the forest. It was so quiet that she heard her own footsteps. She heard every little withered leaf which bent under her feet. Not a bird was to be seen, not a ray of sunlight pierced the leafy branches, and the tall trunks were so close together that when she looked before her, it seemed as if a thick fence of heavy beams hemmed her in on every side. The solitude was such as she had never known before. It was a very dark night, not a single glowworm sparkled in the marsh. Sadly she lay down to sleep, and it seemed to her as if the branches above her parted asunder, and the Saviour looked down upon her with his loving eyes, and little Angel's head peeped out above his head and under his arms. When she woke in the morning, she was not sure if she had dreamed this, or whether it was really true. She walked a little farther, when she met an old woman with a basket full of berries, of which she gave her some. Elise asked if she had seen 11 princes ride through the wood. "No," said the old woman, "but yesterday I saw 11 swans, with golden crowns upon their heads, swimming in the stream close by here." She led Elise a little farther to a slope, at the foot of which the stream meandered. The trees on either bank stretched out their rich leafy branches towards each other, and where, from their natural glow, they could not reach each other, they had torn their roots out of the ground and leaned over the water so as to interlace their branches. Elise said goodbye to the old woman, and walked along by the river till it flowed out into the great open sea. The beautiful open sea lay before the maiden, but not a sail was to be seen on it, not a single boat. How was she ever to get any farther? She looked at the numberless little pebbles on the beach. They were all worn quite round by the water. Glass, iron, stone, whatever was washed up, had taken their shapes from the water, which yet was much softer than her little hand. "With all its rolling, it is untiring, and everything hard is smoothed down. I will be just as untiring. Thank you for your lesson, you clear rolling waves. Sometime, so my poor heart tells me, you will bear me to my beloved brothers." 11 white swan's feathers were lying on the seaweed. She picked them and made a bunch of them. There were still drops of water on them. Whether these were dew or tears, no one could tell. It was very lonely there by the shore, but she did not feel it, for the sea was ever changing. There were a few more changes on it in the course of a few hours than could be seen on an inland freshwater lake in a year. If a big black cloud arose, it was just as if the sea wanted to say, "I can look black too," and then the wind blew up and the waves showed their white crests. But if the clouds were red and the wind dropped, the sea looked like the rose leaf, now white, now green. But however still it was, there was always a little gentle motion just by the shore. The water rose and fell softly, like the bosom of a sleeping child. When the sun was just about to go down, Elise saw 11 wild swans with golden crowns upon their heads, flying towards the shore. They flew in a swaying line, one behind the other, like a white ribbon streamer. Elise climbed up onto the bank and hid behind the bush. The swans settled close by her and flapped their great white wings. As soon as the sun had sunk beneath the water, the swans shed their feathers and became 11 handsome princes. They were Elise's brothers. Although they had altered a good deal, she knew them at once. She felt that they must be her brothers, and she sprang into their arms, calling them by name. They were delighted when they recognized the little sister who had grown so big and beautiful. They laughed and cried and told each other how wickedly their stepmother had treated them. "We brothers," said the eldest, "have to fly about in the guise of swans as long as the sun is above the horizon. When it goes down, we regain our human shapes. So we always have to look out for a resting place near sunset, for should we happen to be flying up among the clouds when the sun goes down, we should be hurled to the depths below. We do not live here. There is another land, just as beautiful as this, beyond the sea, but the way to it is very long, and we have to cross the mighty ocean to get to it. There is not a single island on the way where we can spend the night. Only one solitary little rock rots up above the water midway. It is only just big enough for us to stand upon close together, and if there is a heavy sea the water splashes over us, yet we thank our God for it. We stay there overnight in our human forms, and without it we could never revisit our beloved fatherland, for our flight takes 2 of the longest days in the year. We are only permitted to visit the home of our fathers once a year, and we dare only stay for 11 days. We hover over this big forest from whence we catch a glimpse of the palace where we were born, and where our father lives. Beyond it we can see the high church towers where our mother is buried. We fancy that the trees and bushes here are related to us, and the wild horses gallop over the moors, as we used to see them in our childhood. The charcoal burners still sing the old songs we used to dance to when we were children. This is our fatherland. We are drawn towards it, and here we have found you again, dear little sister. We may stay here 2 days longer, and then we must fly away again across the ocean to a lovely country indeed, but it is not our own dear fatherland. How shall we ever take you with us? We have neither ship nor boat." "How can I deliver you?" said their sister, and they went on talking to each other nearly all night. They only dozed for a few hours. Elise was awakened in the morning by the rustlings of the swan's wings above her. Her brothers were again transformed, and were wheeling round in great circles till she lost sight of them in the distance. One of them, the youngest, stayed behind. He laid his head against her bosom, and she caressed it with her fingers. They remained together all day. Towards evening the others came back, and as soon as the sun went down they took their natural forms. "Tomorrow we must fly away, and we dare not come back for a whole year, but we can't leave you like this. Have you courage to go with us? My arm is strong enough to carry you over the forest, so surely our united strength ought to be sufficient to bear you across the ocean." "Oh yes, take me with you," said Elise. They spent a whole night in weaving a kind of net for the elastic bark of the willow, bound together with tough rushes. They made it both large and strong. Elise lay down upon it, and when the sun rose and the brothers became swans again, they took up the net in their bills and flew high among the clouds with their precious sister, who was fast asleep. The sunbeams fell straight onto her face, so one of the swans flew over her head so that its broad wings should shade her. They were far from land when Elise woke. She thought she must still be dreaming. It seemed so strange to be carried through the air so high up above the sea. By her side lay a branch of beautiful ripe berries, and a bundle of savoury roots which her youngest brother had collected for her, and for which she gave him a grateful smile. She knew it was he who flew above her head, shading her from the sun. They were so high up that the first ship they saw looked like a gull floating on the water. A great cloud came up behind them like a mountain, and Elise saw the shadow of herself on it, and those of the 11 swans looking like giants. It was a more beautiful picture than any she had ever seen before, but as the sun rose higher, the cloud fell behind, and the shadow picture disappeared. They flew on and on all day like an arrow whizzing through the air, but they went slower than usual, for now they had a sister to carry. A storm came up, and the night was drawing on. Elise saw the sun sinking with terror in her heart, for the solitary rock was nowhere to be seen. The swans seemed to be taking stronger stroke than ever. Alas! She was the cause of their not being able to get on faster. As soon as the sun went down they would become men, and they would all be hurled into the sea and drowned. She prayed to God from the bottom of her heart, but still no rock was to be seen. Black clouds gathered, and strong gusts of wind announced a storm. The clouds looked like a great threatening leaden wave, and the flashes of lightning followed each other rapidly. The sun was now at the edge of the sea. Elise's heart quaked, when suddenly the swans shot downward so suddenly that she thought they were falling. Then they hovered again. Half of the sun was below the horizon, and there for the first time she saw the little rock below, which did not look bigger than the head of a seal above the water. The sun sank very quickly. It was no bigger than a star, but her foot touched solid earth. The sun went out like the last sparks of a bit of burning paper. She saw her brothers stand arm in arm around her, but there was only just room enough for them. The waves beat upon the rock and washed over them like drenching rain. The heavens shone with continuous fire, and the thunder rolled, peal upon peal. But the sister and brothers held one another's hands, and sang a psalm which gave them comfort and courage. The air was pure and still at dawn. As soon as the sun rose, the swans flew off with Elise, away from the islet. The sea still ran high. It looked from where they were as if the white foam of the dark green water were millions of swans floating on the waves. When the sun rose higher, Elise saw before her, half floating in the air, great masses of ice, with shining glaciers on the heights. A palace was perched midway a mile in length, with one bold colonnade built above another. Beneath them swayed palm trees and gorgeous blossoms as big as mill wheels. She asked if this was the land to which she was going, but the swans shook their heads, because what she saw was a mirage, the beautiful and ever-changing palace of Fata Morgana. No mortal dared enter it. Elise gazed at it, but as she gazed the palace, gardens, and mountains melted away, and in their place stood 20 proud churches with their high towers and pointed windows. She seemed to hear the notes of the organ, but it was the sea she heard. When she got close to the seeming churches, they changed to a great navy sailing beneath her, but it was only a sea mist passing before her eyes, and now she saw the real land she was bound to. Beautiful blue mountains rose before her with their cedar woods and palaces. Long before the sun went down, she sat among the hills in front of a big cave covered with delicate green creepers. It looked like a piece of embroidery. "Now we shall see what you will dream here tonight," said the youngest brother as he showed her where she was to sleep. "If only I might dream how I could deliver you," she said, and this thought filled her mind entirely. She prayed earnestly to God for his help, and even in her sleep she continued her prayer. It seemed to her that she was flying up to Fata Morgana in her castle in the air. The fairy came towards her. She was charming and brilliant, and yet she was very like the old woman who gave her the berries in the wood, and told her about the swans with the golden crowns. "Your brothers can be delivered," she said, "but have you courage and endurance enough for it? The sea is indeed softer than your hands, and it moulds the hardest stones. But it does not feel the pain your fingers will feel. It has no heart, and does not suffer the pain and anguish you must feel. Do you see this stinging nettle I hold in my hand? Many of this kind grow round the cave where you sleep. Only these, and the ones which grow in the churchyard, may be used. Mark that! Those you may pluck, although they will burn and blister your hands. Crush the nettles with your feet, and you will have flax, and of this you must weave 11 coats of mail with long sleeves. Throw this over the 11 wild swans, and the charm is broken. But remember that from the moment you begin this work till it is finished, even if it takes years, you must not utter a word. The first word you say will fall like a murderous dagger in the hearts of your brothers. Their lives hang on your tongue. Mark this well." She touched her hand at the same moment. It was like burning fire, and woke Elise. It was bright daylight, and close to where she slept lay a nettle like those in her dream. She fell upon her knees with thanks to God, and left the cave to begin her work. She seized the horrid nettles with her delicate hands, and they burnt like fire. Great blisters rose on her hands and arms, but she suffered it willingly if only it would deliver her beloved brothers. She crushed every nettle with her bare feet, and twisted it into green flax. When the sun went down, and the brothers came back, they were alarmed at finding her mute. They thought it was some new witchcraft exercised by their wicked stepmother. But when they saw her hands they understood that it was for their sake. The youngest brother wept, and wherever his tears fell, she felt no more pain, and the blisters disappeared. She spent the whole night at her work, for she could not rest till she had delivered her dear brothers. All the following day while her brothers were away she sat solitary, but never had the time flown so fast. One coat of mail was finished, and she began the next. Then a hunting horn sounded among the mountains. She was much frightened. The sound came nearer, and she heard dogs barking. In terror she rushed into the cave, and tied the nettles she had collected and woven into a bundle, upon which she sat. At this moment a big dog bounded forward from the thicket, and another and another. They barked loudly and ran backward and forward. In a few minutes all the huntsmen were standing outside the cave, and the handsomest of them was the king of the country. He stepped up to Elise. Never had he seen so lovely a girl. "How came you here, beautiful child?" he said. Elise shook her head. She dared not speak. the salvation and the lives of her brothers depended upon her silence. She hid her hands under her apron, so that the king should not see what she suffered. "Come with me," he said. "You cannot stay here. If you are as good as you are beautiful, I will dress you in silks and velvets, put a golden crown upon your head, and you shall live with me and have your home in my richest palace." Then he lifted her upon his horse. She wept and wrung her hands, but the king said, "I only think of your happiness. You will thank me one day for what I am doing." Then he darted off across the mountains, holding her before him on his horse, and the huntsmen followed. When the sun went down, the royal city with churches and cupolas lay before them, and the king led her into the palace, where great fountains played in the marble halls, and where walls and ceilings were adorned with paintings. But she had no eyes for them, she only wept and sorrowed. Passively she allowed a woman to dress her in royal robes, to twist pearls into her hair, and to draw gloves onto her blistered hands. She was dazzlingly lovely as she stood there in all her magnificence. The courtiers bent low before her, and the king wooed her as his bride. Although the archbishop shook his head, and whispered that he feared the beautiful wood maiden was a witch who had dazzled their eyes and infatuated the king refused to listen to him. He ordered the music to play, the richest food to be brought, and the loveliest girls to dance before her. She was led through scented gardens into gorgeous apartments, but nothing brought a smile to her lips or into her eyes. Sorrow sat there like a heritage and a possession for all time. Last of all, the king opened the door of a little chamber close by the room where she was to sleep. It was adorned with costly green carpets, and made to exactly resemble the cave where he found her. On the floor lay the bundle of flax she had spun from the nettles, and from the ceiling hung the shirt of mail, which was already finished. One of the huntsmen had brought all these things away as curiosities. "Here you may dream that you are back in your former home," said the king. "Here is the work upon which you were engaged. In the midst of your splendor it may amuse you to think of those times." When Elise saw all those things so dear to her heart, a smile for the first time played about her lips, and the blood rushed back to her cheeks. She thought of the deliverance of her brothers, and she kissed the king's hand. He pressed her to his heart, and ordered all the church bells to ring marriage peals. The lovely dumb girl from the woods was to be queen of the country. The archbishop whispered evil words into the ear of the king, but they did not reach his heart. The wedding was to take place, and the archbishop himself had to put the crown upon her head. In his anger he pressed the golden circlet so tightly upon her head as to give her pain. But a heavier circlet pressed upon her heart, her grief for her brothers, so she thought nothing of the bodily pain. Her lips were sealed, a single word from her mouth would cost her brothers their lives, but her eyes was full of love for the good and handsome king, who did everything he could to please her. Every day she grew more and more attached to him, and longed to confide in him, tell him her sufferings, but dumb she must remain, and in silence must bring her labor to completion. Therefore at night she stole away from his side into her secret chamber, which was decorated like a cave, and here she knitted one shirt after another. When she came to the 7th, all her flax was worked up. She knew that these nettles which she was to use grew in the churchyard, but she had to pluck them herself. How was she to get there? "Oh, what is the pain of my fingers compared with the anguish of my heart?" she thought. "I must venture out. The good God will not desert me." With as much terror in her heart as if she was doing some evil deed, she stole down, one night, into the moonlit garden, and through the long alleys out into the silent streets to the churchyard. There she saw, sitting on a gravestone, a group of hideous ghouls, who took off their tattered garments, as if they were about to bathe, and then they dug down into the freshly made graves with their skinny fingers, and tore the flesh from the bodies, and devoured it. Elise had to pass close by them, and they fixed their evil eyes upon her. But she said a prayer as she passed, picked the stinging nettles, and hurried back to the palace with them. Only one person saw her, but that was the archbishop, who watched while others slept. Surely now all his bad opinions of the queen were justified. All was not as it should be with her. She must be a witch, and therefore she had bewitched the king and all the people. He told the king in the confessional what he had seen and what he feared. When those bad words passed his lips, the pictures of the saints shook their heads as if to say, "It is not so. Elise is innocent." The archbishop, however, took it differently, and thought that they were bearing witness against her and shaking their heads at her sin. 2 big tears rolled down the king's cheeks, and he went home with doubt in his heart. He pretended to sleep at night, but no quiet sleep came to his eyes. He perceived how Elise got up and went to her private closet. Day by day his face grew darker. Elise saw it, but could not imagine what was the cause of it. It alarmed her, and what was she not already suffering in her heart because of her brothers? Her salt tears ran down upon the royal purple velvet. They lay upon it like sparkling diamonds, and all who saw their splendor wished to be a queen. She had, however, almost reached the end of her labors. Only 1 shirt of mail was wanting, but again she had no more flax, and not a single nettle was left. Once more, for the last time, she must go to the churchyard to pluck a few handfuls. She thought with dread of the solitary walk and the horrible goals, but her will was as strong as her trust in God. Elise went, but the king and the archbishop followed her. They saw her disappear within the grated gateway of the churchyard. When they followed, they saw the ghouls sitting on the gravestone, as Elise had seen them before, and the king turned away his head, because he thought she was among them. She, whose head this very evening had rested on his breast. "The people must judge her," he groaned, and the people judged. "Let her be consumed in the glowing flames." She was led away from her beautiful royal apartments to a dark, damp dungeon, where the wind whistled through the grated window. Instead of velvet and silk, they gave her the bundle of nettles she had gathered to lay her head upon. The hard-burning shirts of mail were to be her covering, but they could have given her nothing more precious. She set to work again, with many prayers to God. Outside her prison, the street boys sang derisive songs about her, and not a soul comforted her with a kind word. Towards evening she heard the rustle of swans' wings close to her window. It was her youngest brother. At last he had found her. He sobbed aloud with joy, although he knew that the coming night might be her last. But then her work was almost done, and her brothers were there. The archbishop came to spend his last hours with her, as he had promised the king. She shook her head at him, and by looks and gestures begged him to leave her. She had only this night in which to finish her work, or else all would be wasted, all. Her pain, tears, and sleepless nights. The archbishop went away with bitter words against her, but poor Elise knew that she was innocent, and she went on with her work. The little mice ran about the floor, bringing nettles to her feet, so as to give what help they could, and a thrush sat on the grating of the window, where he sang all night, as merrily as he could, to keep up her courage. It was still only dawn, and the sun would not rise for an hour, when the 11 brothers stood at the gate of the palace, begging to be taken to the king. This could not be done, was the answer, for it was still night. The king was asleep, and no one dared wake him. All their entreaties and threats were useless. The watch turned out, and even the king himself came to see what was the matter, but just then the sun rose, and no more brothers were to be seen. Only 11 wild swans hovering over the palace. The whole populace streamed out of the town gates. They were all anxious to see the witch burned. A miserable horse drew the cart in which Elise was seated. They had put upon her a smoke of green sacking, and all her beautiful long hair hung loose from the lovely head. Her cheeks were deathly pale, and her lips moved softly, while her fingers unceasingly twisted the green yarn. Even on the way to her death, she could not abandon her unfinished work. 10 shirts lay completed at her feet. She laboured away at the 11th amid the scoffing insults of the populace. "Look at the witch, how she mutters! She has never a book of psalms in her hands. No, there she sits with her loathsome sorcery. Tear it away from her into 1,000 bits!" The crowd pressed around her to destroy her work, but just then 11 white swans flew down and perched upon the cart, flapping their wings. The crowd gave way before them in terror. "It is a sign from heaven! She is innocent!" they whispered. but they dared not say it aloud. The executioners seized her by the hand, but she hastily threw the 11 shirts over the swans, who were immediately transformed to 11 handsome princes. But the youngest had a swan's wing in place of an arm, for one sleeve was wanting to his shirt of mail. She had not been able to finish it. "Now I may speak. I am innocent." The populace, who saw what had happened, bowed down before her, as if she had been a saint, but she sank lifeless in her brother's arms, so great had been the strain, the terror, and the suffering she had endured. "Yes, innocent she is indeed," said the eldest brother, and he told them all that had happened. While he spoke, a wonderful fragrance spread around as of millions of roses. Every faggot in the pile had taken root and shot out branches, and a great high hedge of red roses had arisen. At the very top was one pure white blossom. It shone like a star, and the king broke it off and laid it on Elise's bosom, and she woke with joy and peace in her heart. All the church bells began to ring of their own accord, and the singing birds flocked around them. Surely such a bridal procession went back to the palace as no king had ever seen before. End of chapter 12. Recording by Christine G. in Oslo, Norway.